Chapter 2. Eels Island, Zoe said to herself. I still haven't got a clue where I am. There were so many questions she wanted answers to. She still had no idea how this ragged bunch of people survived. The island was little more than a tiny strip of mud in the middle of the sea. All she knew was that she had finally left Norwich forever. It had been her home for all of her short, strange life. The houses her parents had grown up in were both underwater now. The house she'd been born in was a ruin. When it got too dangerous, they'd moved further into Norwich, to higher ground. Zoe was about 7 at the time, and it meant moving closer to other people. Zoe's parents didn't really like this. Other people generally meant trouble. As a result, Zoe had a few friends. There'd been one or two, but gradually their parents had given up and taken the supply ship to the mainland. Every parting had been hard for Zoe. After a while, she made sure never to let herself like someone too much, because sooner or later, they would leave too. When they came to move house, there were so few people left that there was plenty of space, and plenty of huge old houses to choose from. Which one do you like, Zoe? Her dad had asked. They were standing at the end of a long street of large detached Victorian houses. All of them were unoccupied, and they'd all been looted too. But what they needed was a roof over their heads and a large garden to grow food. Zoe looked carefully. Finally, she saw a house that seemed a little more friendly than the others. That one, she said, and she walked up to the gates. Seems okay to me, said her dad. Oh, it beats raising a mortgage, doesn't it? Said her mum. After the night when her parents had sailed away without her, Zoe hadn't wanted to go back to the old house. It was too much. She'd spent too long moving from place to place, but nowhere seemed right. So she always moved on. One day, at the allotments, Natasha suggested that they live together. It wasn't long after Zoe had lost her parents, and the allotments were still being organised fairly well. There was a group of men and women who ran the allotments. They guarded it at night to stop people stealing the produce, and in the daytime, they organised their work. For a few hours' work, you could earn yourself some vegetables or some tinned food from their own store, if there was nothing fresh to be harvested. Zoe and her parents had made good use of the system, while their own garden was not producing the goods. It worked fairly well for a few years, not like later, when things really started to go to pieces. Then there had been fights, and people raided the allotment's food store rather than work. Natasha's parents were dead, but she lived with some other people in the old block of flats. Zoe thought about her offer, but she turned her down. She didn't like the setup and didn't like the other people. After that night on the shore, when she'd been separated from her mum and dad, something had changed in Zoe. The fights, the desperation, the fear on people's faces. She'd seen that everyone was only out for themselves, and that she knew no one really wanted her around anyway. They saw her as a rebel and treated her as a bit of an outcast. But that suited Zoe more or less. Let them think she was a tough loner, and they'd more likely leave her alone. And there was some truth in it, but really, she was just too scared to trust anyone. She didn't want to be with anyone else. She just wanted her parents. Then Zoe had found the boats. She'd been searching for food. Most places had been scavenged for all their tins of food already. Shops, warehouses and so on. So Zoe had been forced to try the most dangerous part of Norwich. Here, there were some old warehouses that were in a really bad state. Bits of them were always collapsing, and there wasn't a bit of ground anywhere that wasn't covered in piles of rubble. It meant stumbling over heaps of fallen buildings, but at least Zoe was safe from one thing: other people. She knew no one else came here, simply because of the dangerous buildings. She hadn't found any food and was beginning to think of giving up for the day. Then she had spotted the side of the boat sticking up through the mud in an old warehouse. The warehouse was right by the sea's edge, which was just a few feet below it. Boat and mud must have been washed in together in one of the high points of the flood, and now the mud gripped the boat like glue. Despite the danger from the ruined buildings all around her, she decided to make a new home for herself in the warehouse. She knew her mum and dad would have been horrified at the risk she was taking, but Zoe was more scared of other people than she was of falling bricks and stones. Later, she would change her mind as the building started to groan horribly in the slightest wind. Then she would move her boat to safety at the shed in the graveyard. but for now, the old warehouse was her own. She moved house into a tiny room in the roof of the warehouse. It had been an office. Clearly, no one had been there for a long time. The room must have been abandoned when the floods came in. There was still paperwork and office furniture sitting just as they had been then. There were even some tins of tomato soup in a small cupboard in the corner. Zoe took this as a good omen, a sign that it was the right place to live. She was very hungry, and then she took a small pack from her bag. It contained her most precious possessions: 2 water bottles, some bits of clothes, her compass, a bottle of vitamin pills she'd found, a pocket torch without batteries, a small blanket, and an old book in which she had meant to keep a diary, but hadn't. Finally, she found what she was looking for. She took her penknife and skewered the top of one of the tins of soup. 2 holes, one to drink from and one to let the air in, so the soup came out more easily, just like her dad had showed her. She swigged the cold soup. It tasted great. She couldn't finish it in one go, so she carefully poured the rest into one of her water bottles, which was empty. Water was the hardest thing to find, much harder than finding food. She used the bottles to collect whatever drinkable water she could find, though occasionally she had found some bottles of mineral water. She mostly drank rainwater. She had hidden a series of tins and pans in various places, on rooftops and behind collapsed buildings, anywhere that no one else went. She would collect the water after every rainfall and store it in her bottles. She felt safe in the office room and could keep an eye on the boat too. She spent days digging it out, working as quietly as she could, just in case anyone was around. One night, there was a terrible crash. Zoe's fragile room shuddered, and the whole warehouse with it, as she realised that a nearby building was falling down. She clung to the floor and prayed that her room wasn't about to drop to the ground with it. The noise was awful, and it seemed to take forever to finish, but finally it did. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but lay awake listening to the sound of bricks, occasionally slipping, and then settling again. The next morning she worked even harder on the boat. At the beginning it was just something to do, to stop her from going crazy. But as she uncovered more and more of the boat, she saw that it was in good condition, and she began to have real hopes of making it float again. Finally, one day it was free, and she began to wash the slimy mud from it. As she washed the bow, a single word appeared: Laika. "Hello, Laika," said Zoe, and she felt herself smile. She'd set out to sea in Laika, but now she was separated from her. A sudden fear took her, but fumbling in her pocket, she found she still had the compass. It was all she had left. Mentally, she made a list of what to do. She would try and find out where she was, then she'd get some food, and as soon as she could, she would get back to Laika and escape. Try and find the mainland, and then maybe she would find some trace of her parents. One thing she knew for sure: she didn't intend to spend any time on Eels Island. "There's something bad here," she said quietly. "Laika, I won't be long." But she didn't get the chance to do anything. 2 girls came up to her almost as soon as Doobie left. They were both tall and scrawny. They were dressed a little better than most, but their clothes were more a matter of improvisation than anything else. "I'm Molly," said one of them. "This is Sarah." "Hello," said Zoe. "We've got to look after you," said Molly, but she made it clear that they hated the idea. Molly turned to Sarah. "Doobie says so, doesn't he?" I don't need looking after," said Zoe. "Oh, yes you do," said Molly. "Doobie said we should stay with you all day, show you around, God knows why." She turned to Sarah again. "Why, Doobie didn't just have your boyfriend do it like everyone else?" "Yeah, my spat's the man for the job," said Sarah, grinning. "Stinking water rat, isn't she?" added Molly, looking at Zoe. "And ugly too," said Sarah with spite. Tempted as she was to hit her, Zoe put on a false smile. "Well, maybe there's somewhere I can wash." "Go outside, take your lovely clothes off and wait for it to rain," laughed Sarah. Molly joined in. "Silly little..." Again, Zoe just smiled. If she couldn't get away for a while, her only chance was to be accepted on the island. It seemed that the only person who didn't want her done was Doobie, and that didn't make her feel any better. She wondered what he wanted for her for. "Well, if Doobie says you've got to show me around," said Zoe. "Yeah, all right," said Molly. "Come on then, get a move on." The mention of Doobie's name brought an instant reaction, just the way Spat and Munchkin had jumped at when he said. This was different though. It wasn't fear, but something else. The two girls' voices softened when they spoke his name. By the time they'd shown Zoe halfway around the cathedral, she knew what it was. Love, pure and plain. This is where Doobie stands when he tells us what to do, said Sarah. Over there's Doobie's room, said Molly, pointing at a side chapel with a newly made door. This is a gate. Here is where Doobie killed the last of the dogs. It was as though they were talking about a god, not a boy. Another tribe? Asked Zoe. Of course, said Molly, as if Zoe was stupid. They tried a final raid on the island about a month ago, but Doobie made sure we were all right. His plans always work. This one dog had sneaked inside, and Doobie saw him and stuck a spike into him. Then he chopped off his head and stuck it on a spike in the roof, along with everyone else who's coming visiting, added Molly. Zoe couldn't tell if they were joking or not. They were older than she was, but seemed like serious little children. Just in case they weren't joking, Zoe prayed that her parents' ship had come nowhere near. If civilization was starting to leave Norwich, it had left here a long time ago. All day they kept Zoe busy. Once or twice she began to think that they had relaxed a little towards her, but then she would ask something and they would laugh at her, or tell her about the fate of other visitors to the island. So watch it, said Sarah, or I'll get Spat to sort you out. She laughed. Only once did they ask Zoe about herself. What are you doing here anyway? Asked Sarah. In spite of herself, Zoe couldn't help answering. She was tired and her defences were down. Looking for my parents. What do you mean? I lost them. They left. Without you? Molly said, laughing. No, it wasn't, Zoe began, but it was too late. They left her, said Sarah to Molly. So, why are you looking for them then? They obviously wanted to get rid of you. No, said Zoe, trying not to let them get to her. No? When was this anyway? Asked Sarah. I don't know, a few months, maybe a year. Zoe wished she kept her mouth shut. A year? They left you a year ago and they haven't come looking for you? See, they don't want her, Molly said to Sarah. Yes, they do, Zoe shouted. That's right, Sarah said to Molly. That's right. That's not the reason they haven't come to find her. Molly stared at Sarah, who seemed to be defending Zoe all of a sudden. The reason is, Sarah continued, that they're all dead. Sarah and Molly collapsed into laughter. No, Zoe shouted. No, that's not true. Tears started to burn her eyes, but the two girls just laughed more. Of course it is, they said. Why else didn't they come to find you? They laughed again. Zoe tried to ignore them, but the awful possibility that they might be right was too painful. Sarah and Molly stayed with Zoe for the rest of the day, until late evening. A horn blew, a strange low sound which echoed around the vast old building. Right, said Sarah to Molly. Come on then. They got up and started to leave. Wait, said Zoe. Where are you going? What's that noise mean? Curfew, said Sarah without looking back. Doors closed for the night. And with that, they were gone.